I really, really, really love paper. But this wasn't always the case. When I first moved to Amsterdam, I was in advertising, and I just moved everything over here, and the recession hit. Suddenly, there just wasn't anything to do. So instead of stressing out that I'd relocated my whole life over for pretty much no reason, I decided to make something out of paper. Now, I'm not really sure why, but it just felt like a good idea at the time, and a bit better than just kind of scrolling through Facebook. So I decided to set myself a little bit of a challenge. I used to work with paper when I was younger, and I wanted to learn more about a material that I used to work with. So I took a picture of a building I cycled past every day on the way to work and distorted it in Photoshop and decided to make that instead. Now, instead of going crazy by making all the teeny tiny little details, I found it super meditative. Even my little shaky hands were able to move things that were about 2 millimeters in thickness and stick them onto all the awnings. I was really, really enthusiastic. So much so that all my friends encouraged me to leave advertising and kind of follow this weird fuzzy feeling. So I ended up getting a job in a bar as a champagne waitress and funding an even bigger project. Now, I literally sat for hours and hours by myself in my living room, making even more teeny tiny little details, to the point that I even gave myself a crick in the neck by just kind of doing this motion for like months and months and months on end. But finally, I was finished, and I'd created a little short film. So I approached a bunch of production companies and hoped someone would see potential in the skills I hoped I was showing. A few months later, of what felt like ages kind of maybe hitting refresh a few times on my email, I finally heard back from somebody. And they asked, had I ever worked with toilet paper? Now, I know it might not seem like the most glamorous of moves career-wise, but I was really excited. Could I work with toilet paper? So, actually, I don't know if any of you have ever worked with toilet paper before, but it is. It's super, super absorbent, which therefore meant that I didn't actually have to wait and watch glue dry. It kind of just stuck together by itself. It was amazing. So we pitched for the job, and we won it because I was able to make things by hand. We were able to capture this softness. Now I wanted to learn more about paper. What else could paper do? Apparently, way more than I initially gave it credit for, which I found out when I created a sculpture that was to be submerged in a tank filled with fluid. Now, this is just normal paper, and you can see it getting wet, but it totally survived. I mean, we filled the fluid up around it, and the fluid had some special properties, but the paper completely survived. I was blown away. I was like, what else can it do? And I then was invited to create a rocket that was to go into space. Now, for someone who loves paper and also was really excited by space, this was like a dream come true. So I went with my little rocket to Germany, we attached it to a weather balloon, and we sent it up into the stratosphere. Now, it was a bit cloudy, so I was like, oh, will it survive the moisture? But it got up to 38,000 meters, which is amazing. So I wanted to know more. What else could I do with paper? Now, like toilet paper, I created a feeling of softness and warmth. Could I create the opposite kind of feeling by working with another tactile paper? So I went to my local DIY shop and loaded up my bag with tons of different kinds of toilet paper. With sandpaper. And then created a series that would have looked a little bit random if made by paper, but suddenly took on quite a sinister turn. The more you thought about your interaction with these sandpaper models, the more it kind of left you with a feeling that was a little bit uneasy. So I was quite interested by this. What other kind of feelings could I play around with just by working with a type of paper? Could I change people's preconceived ideas about paper to bring a safeness to the world's most famous instrument of death, the guillotine? So, partnering with director Hal Cackland, we decided to set up this experiment. Could I change how people interact with a guillotine just by covering it with paper? So we literally built a 3.8-meter-high guillotine. The only difference being that we'd covered ours with paper, and we dropped a sheet of paper on people's neck and called the exhibition Paper Cuts, because we promised nothing more deadly than a paper cut. But obviously, we made sure it did not do this and tested it on ourselves first, because we did not want to get sued. So we set the model up and waited. And we actually had lines of people queuing up for this thing. People said to us, "Can I go in first?" Which I'm sure has never been said in front of a guillotine before. Parents even trusted us with their children, all because we'd covered it in paper. So then we went from Amsterdam to London, and excitingly, we were asked to exhibit alongside the blade from the French Revolution in a museum in Switzerland. So we obviously jumped at the chance. We'd gone from brainstorming in a bar by ourselves to suddenly being opposite the piece of history that had inspired it in the first place, the blade that had killed Marie Antoinette. So we knew we really wanted to create the world's most beautiful guillotine to really juxtapose against the real cold blade. Now, we were going to cover this thing in hundreds and hundreds of butterflies and roses and have it blossom from thorns at the bottom to then growing into flowers. And it was going to take up hours and hours of work, because this thing is like 4 meters high, and it has 2 legs, obviously, so we were having to cover them all. So when I'm faced with doing something really monotonous and really laborious, I have to watch movies or listen to podcasts to stop myself kind of going completely crazy. Now, this is the project that I want to talk to you about the most. So whilst I was making all these little roses, I was actually watching a documentary on female genital mutilation. Female genital mutilation was something I found out about so completely accidentally whilst at university around 11 years ago. And I was researching something which had exactly the same acronym, FGM. So I typed in FGM, thinking I was going to learn about fractionally gradient material for a ceramics project. And instead, like a whole other world opened up. And I think when you find out about something so shocking in such a way, like it really stays with you. So from that point, it's always been something that I've kind of read up about and watched documentaries on with a hope to try and do something towards. So whilst I was making some of these teeny tiny roses, I remember kind of looking at my hand and then looking at the computer screen and then looking down and being like, if I just make a couple of little tweaks, it kind of does look like a little vulva. So maybe if I can kind of use paper to calm the terror of a guillotine, maybe I can use paper to illustrate a really difficult topic. And a few months later, I returned back to this thought. Now, female genital mutilation is really, really complicated. And I did a lot of research trying to find a way that I could possibly join this conversation. And whilst researching, I realized there's so much taboo surrounding like the female genitals, definitely not enough awareness about FGM, but not really enough awareness about genitals in general, that 2 areas of concern came back. The first area being that 3 million girls a year are subjected to some form of FGM. That's like 8,200 girls a day, which I think is even pretty hard to imagine. Most of the time, this happens without any form of anesthesia and can lead to lifelong health problems. No one knows how many girls a year die from FGM. The other concern was about sexual education in the Western world. So whilst researching about FGM, I kind of stumbled upon another load of facts, and that being that the cosmetic practice on the genitals in females called labiaplasty has risen by 16% over the last year and doubled in young girls under the age of 18, implying kind of a great lack of education in what's normal and what isn't when it comes down to your labias. And in fact, a normal labia can range from 0.7 to 5 centimeters in length, which is pretty varied. But if younger people are maybe looking to porn for some sexual education and being like faced with a whole different opinion on what normality is, then no wonder why they might be looking at it and feeling pressurized to change. So then faced with all this information, I decided to create the project No More Cutting. I wanted to kind of raise awareness just about the genitals and get more people talking about them and create a whole celebration of them, how they are in all their glory and just naturally. Paper was the perfect material to sculpt with, to really capture all the individual differences that make up each one. And also, it's really great to highlight the fragility of each one by playing with the term paper and cutting. So then collaborating with a new group of awesome people, No More Cutting became a reality. However, it was not the easiest of beginnings of a project. We need to get in real images of real genitals for me and another girl to then craft them by hand, to then take pictures of and put them up online. So then I became that person trying to wonder how or if I could ask my friends to possibly send me in their pictures so I could then build up a base to then get more people interested. And luckily, I have some really, really solid friends that did me a favor and did so. So now with their help, the collection has now grown to 116. But I really hope that this is just the beginning. The health of women really affects the health of people everywhere. So all people have a stake in this conversation. So therefore, I'd like to ask those of you who feel brave enough and are willing and fit the requirements to go to nomorcutting.com and send me a picture, and it's all anonymous. And we're going to keep making them and keep growing the collection, because the ambition is to then put on a traveling artwork and keep getting more people talking, keep raising, keep breaking down the taboos and raise more awareness about female genital mutilation. And join the ever-growing campaign to try and stop this within a generation and really bring this devastating practice to an end. Thank you.